Hey everyone, I have to be kind of quiet with this video. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and so people are sleeping, and I live in an apartment complex, so I don't want to wake the woman downstairs up. I want to say first, before I get into anything else, my last video, I am so thankful that I did make that, and that people responded the way that they did to it. It was unexpected, and I'm very happy on how it turned out. And so, not to give too much of an update, but everything's on track. With that, I didn't do more than what I wanted, and I've cut the other cigarette thing in half so far. So, kind of feeling it, but everything's okay. Uh, what I want to talk about today is how I was raised. And I don't know how anyone else was raised, or if there's a similarity between people with anxiety or whatever. I mean, maybe you don't have anxiety, but it's your life. Um, I was raised in a family where I was always wrong. And I don't think that it was necessarily something that they intended to do. I mean, I don't believe that any parent sets out to instill something negative in their child. But for me, I grew up in a family that was one way on the inside, and then on the outside, it was completely different. Inside, my parents would fight. I can remember multiple times where my mom was threatening to leave my father. And I was also raised in an environment where any idea that I had or any suggestion that I had was wrong, because after all, what do I know? And I think growing up and maybe catching on to things quicker than the average person, I always felt frightened that, well, maybe I am wrong, because it was drilled in that I am wrong. I mean, that's just what it was. I don't know how else to say it, but I was always wrong. Um, but what goes on now is, as an adult, I'm still that child. I'm still wrong. And so decisions that I make seem very life or death. I was raised to believe that if I was to do something without telling my parents, that I would end up having something bad happen. And this carried pretty much up until mid-adulthood. I mean, like, well, not, I'm kind of in mid-adulthood now, but let's say 25 years old, or longer, actually. I remember having health issues and telling my parents later, and they would say, oh, well, don't ever do that. You know, you could have something happen, and then you'll die, and the police will come to the house, and they'll say, well, didn't you know your son was dead? And what kind of parents would they think that we were? And so this would scare me, and I remember always feeling as if they don't know what's going on, if they don't know what's happening to me, and if I do anything that's outside of what they approve of, that something bad, really bad, is going to happen. My mom now, being where she's at, she's just like, oh, I was never that way, or she'll say, well, I don't care, do whatever you got to do, you're an adult. But I was never treated that way. I was never allowed to make decisions for myself. And I feel like I don't know where I'm going with this video, but I'm trying to put out there that my childhood was very not controlled, chaotic, I guess. Like, it would be, you have to do this, this, and this. And then it would change the following week. It wouldn't be the same rules as the week before. I remember with abandonment issues that I have, I've never lost anyone in my life. Like, no one's really ever rejected me. But growing up, if I got in trouble, I would see, from going to childhood friends' house and stuff like that, I would see how their parents treated them. And then when I would do something wrong, which probably wasn't even that big of a deal, but just what children do, I would be sent to my room, of course, everyone is, but the threat would be, I'm calling the military school, we're sending you away, we're not going to deal with you anymore. And I remember feeling petrified that I'm going to be sent away, I'm never going to see my parents again, and just constantly having to be perfect. I remember other children my own age acting out or acting like children, and I was forced into this role of having to be very perfect. And again, my parents would deny this, but it was, if I wasn't quiet, if I wasn't, well, respectful, of course, I mean, that's something you want to do, but just overly respectful, if I was just not just obey orders from people, then somehow I was in trouble. And so I remember having this anxiety very early on in my life of, I'm wrong and people will reject me if I don't do what they say. And what will other people think? Because that was a big theme in my parents' house, like, what will other people think? And this went on when we went to church. A lot of times on Sundays, we would go and my parents would be in the car and they'd be arguing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'd be in the back seat. And we'd pull up, we'd get out, we'd walk up the ramp to the church, the door would open, and people would say, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And my mom would be like, "Oh, I'm so great, I'm great, I'm great." And as a teenager, I got to the point where I said to them, "You're fake. Like, this is not fake. We're not fake. This is what everyone does." And sometimes people do. I mean, I get that as an adult, but I can tell you that growing up, when I would leave my parents' home and spend time at other people's houses, I started to realize this is not how my life is. And how we live is different than how everyone else is living. My parents had a great deal of anxiety themselves. My father could be in the basement and my mom would move a pan on the stove and maybe it like clanked a little too loudly, or maybe she laid it down a little bit too hard, or maybe she opened a cabinet and a pan fell out on the bottom shelf and hit the floor, and he'd come tearing up the staircase. And what happened? What broke? What happened? And my mom would be like, "Oh, nothing. Go back downstairs, blah, blah, blah," and everything. But it was so tense. I mean, that's the only way I can really describe it. And people that grew up with me would say, "Your parents are weird." And I never really understood at that age that they were, and they are. I know that. Doesn't mean I don't love them, but they are. Being an only child, I had no siblings. Well, I have a half-sister, but she long since was married. Was a daughter from my mother from another marriage. And just my father would yell all the time. And I remember pouring milk and him standing over me, and if it spilled, he would freak out. But of course, someone standing over you, you feel so tense, you're going to spill. You might, more likely to anyway. And I just remember just him always going off, always yelling, always carrying on, and my mom making everything very dangerous. The whole world was very dangerous. Oh, well, we don't do that because we're proper people, or we don't do that because of this. And it really skewed my view of everything in the world. And I want to get into this more later in another video, but I just started thinking recently, like, I'm carrying this view of the world that's not necessarily true. I expect, although I do get it, I get this from many, many people and many medical professionals, but I expect to go in and say something and have people flip out. And they usually do. I'm not going to lie, but at the same time, it's like, I think I keep picking people that are the very same type of people as my parents. It's like that same conflict going on and on and on. I don't really know how to describe that. I guess if you think about like a girl who has a father who's a severe alcoholic and beats her mother, she ends up somehow with a boyfriend that does the same thing to her. And then she breaks up with him to find a totally different guy who ends up being the same way and doing the same thing to her. And I see myself repeating this pattern. Only I'm aware of it. I just don't know how to break that pattern. I know that I'm repeating the past over and over and over, and in my mind I'm still wrong. In my mind I'm still 8 years old and frightened, and in my mind I can never be right, and any decision I make will be the wrong decision. And that causes a lot of conflict for me, because I think, okay, just as an example, I have a colonoscopy, which I have to have, but let's just use this as an example. I have one. Therefore, because I've had bad experiences, many, as you know, they'll perforate my colon, I'll lose my colon, I'll have a colostomy bag, and then what? If only I didn't have that colonoscopy, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in now. Other side of the coin. I have it, and no, I don't have it. Sorry, other side of the coin, I don't have it. And then what happens is I really have cancer, and it spreads through my body, and I die. Again, my fault. both sides my fault. One thing I'll do it, I have a horrible thing happen to me during it, and well, you shouldn't have done it. I can hear my parents, say in my head. The other situation is I don't do it, and then something happens, and I hear my parents saying, well, why didn't you do it? Why are you so stupid? Why didn't you, do that? So I feel as if I can't win with situations. I really don't feel this video is clear. I can't put it into words, but I can just tell you that, and I want to get more into this, that growing up in my household was just a very tense situation. And I went to school, and I happened to be, like every child that gets picked on, but I happened to be the one, to be picked on. So at home, I was walking on eggshells. And at school, I was walking on eggshells. And there was this tension, this constant tension that no matter where I was, it wasn't good. I always felt this horrible, anxiety. And interesting is when I got to high school, finally it stopped. And I had decent friends, and I knew people, and I became popular. And that's when the panic attacks started. The panic attacks started with me when the stress left. Because at that point, I wasn't at home all the time. I was out with my friends. I ignored my parents. I would go home. I'd eat dinner. I'd go to bed. I'd get up. I'd go back to school, hang out with friends. So I removed myself from that situation. And then also, I no longer had that horrible teasing that was taking place. And within a matter of maybe a month, my first panic attack, I was on a bus, and it just hit. And I think that it has a lot to do with it. I have other things that I want to talk about in the future. With what happened as a child to trigger a lot of this anxiety. But that's just kind of where I am. So now as an adult, I'm sitting here still living with that fear of, oh, you have to know what's going on. But really, why? You don't know anything anymore. In fact, you probably don't deserve to really know anything. I feel guilty saying that because you know what's going on with my mom and stuff. But you don't need to know anything that's happening with me. And the decision for me to do something, I'm no safer doing it on my own than I would be with your approval. But yet I still feel that I need that. And so with my mom being sick, and what if she dies? My thought is, oh, well, how will I ever, move on with my life? But at the same time, this is all, I want to say fictional fantasy, but that's not what I mean. It's been drilled into me that this is how I must live. And if I don't do it this way, if I'm not perfect, if I don't, I'm not allowed to fall apart. And actually, that's something really major with my family. I'm not allowed to break. Things that I tell you, they would die. That I'm even saying this in public. Oh, aren't you embarrassed? No, I'm not. Maybe I should be, but no. They would just freak out over what I do. How can you make everything so public? I don't know. But also I'm finding, okay, I need people in my life. And I don't know how to let people in quickly, which is probably good in some ways. But at the same time, I want to let people in because I need a new family. I need to have myself grow up and allow people to be my family and allow myself to be vulnerable and trust certain people and not have this conditioning that I grew up with that everything that I do is all my fault. If I go out and I have a doctor's appointment and something happens to me and that doctor treats me badly, I take that onto myself. I feel as if, okay, well, maybe I should have explained that better, or if I was smarter, or really, maybe he's just an ass. Maybe I did nothing wrong. It's just life, it's a circumstance, but I still really take that in. I feel like there has to be this absolute perfection that I have to figure this out on my own, that I have to, I still have to find the right doctor. I mean, I'm not going to work with someone that I feel is incompetent, but at the same time, I have a hard time trusting anyone, which is so strange because people in general, outside of the medical community, no one's, like I said before, no one's betrayed me, no one's ditched me. Yeah, well, I had to think about that, but no one really has. I mean, outside of normal circumstances. So why do I feel this way? Why do I feel so uptight about it? That everything is carried on my shoulders. It's not. And I realize that. So that's just something I'm babbling about. And just like the last video, I'm going to watch this because I don't know if it makes any sense. But if I think it's going to help somebody, I'm going to put this up. And anyway, I'll talk tomorrow. I kind of want to get into something that happened to me as a child where I got hit by a car and what happened with that, but that's not going to be tonight because this video is already too long. So maybe I'll talk about that tomorrow, and if not, I will definitely be talking about that really soon. So thanks everyone for your support and everything that's been going on with me, and I am doing really well. I am getting better. It's just going to take about 8 more days, and I should be set, and then I'll just be my old, normal, sick, boring self. But anyway, okay, I'll talk to you all later, and thanks so much for all your replies. Seriously. Maybe catching on to things quicker than the average person, I always felt frightened that, well, maybe I am wrong, because it was drilled in that I am wrong. I mean, that's just what it was. I don't know how else to say it, but I was always wrong. But what goes on now is, as an adult, I'm still that child. I'm still wrong. And so decisions that I make seem very life or death. Whatever. I mean, maybe you don't have anxiety, but it's your life. I was raised in a family where I was always wrong. And I don't think that it was necessarily something that they intended to do. I mean, I don't believe that any parent sets out to instill something negative in their child. But for me, I grew up in a family that was one way on the inside, and then on the outside it was completely different. Inside, my parents would fight. I can remember multiple times where my mom was threatening to leave my father. And I was also raised in an environment where any idea that I had or any suggestion that I had was wrong, because after all, what do I know? And I think growing up and maybe on how it turned out. And so, not to give too much of an update, but everything's on track. With that, I didn't do more than what I wanted, and I've cut the other cigarette thing in half so far. So, kind of feeling it, but everything's okay. What I want to talk about today is how I was raised. And I don't know how anyone else was raised, or if there's a similarity between people with anxiety or... Hey everyone, I have to be kind of quiet with this video. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and so people are sleeping, and I live in an apartment complex, so I don't want to wake the woman downstairs up. I want to say first, before I get into anything else, my last video, I am so thankful that I did make that, and that people responded the way that they did to it. It was unexpected, and I'm very happy.